A man wakes up in a strange place, completely disoriented about his whereabouts and the absence of his phone. Desperate for answers, he attempts to contact someone, but a voice from behind a closed door instructs him to remain silent and composed. An unseen speaker reveals that the man has been drugged and will feel unwell for the next few days. Strangely, it's emphasized that it's time for him to work, and the mysterious speaker bids him farewell. As Joe tries to process this bewildering situation, a small opening in the door reveals several food packets. Filled with urgency, Joe pleads with the unseen guard for assistance, explaining that he has a pregnant wife who needs him at home. Despite being warned multiple times to stay away from the door and not to reach into the slot, Joe ignores the caution, resulting in a harsh blow to his wrist. Distraught, he cries out, insisting that he doesn't deserve to be in this predicament. Later on, Joe ingeniously uses his tie to bend his wrist and begins to explore the unfamiliar surroundings. Gathering some food and a small water bottle, he anticipates a modest meal. However, just as he's about to start eating, a blaring siren interrupts the silence, and the voice of the Mallard Corporation's AI welcomes him to a mysterious training program promising self-improvement. Seeking information, Joe asks questions, but his neighbor wisely advises him to stay quiet, as answers are elusive. A countdown to midnight begins, signaling the onset of Joe's last hours of rest. Perplexed, Joe attempts to learn the interlocutor's name, only to be met with surprise. Names might not have a place in this peculiar setting. Soon, screams from neighboring individuals echo, pleading for quiet and rest. The unseen interlocutor encourages Joe to accept that this place is Mallard and to prepare for sleep, emphasizing that tomorrow will be the longest day of his life. As Joe settles against the wall, a melodic whistle pierces the air, followed by a man's desperate plea not to go through with something. Despite promises to exceed the plan the next day, the man seems overpowered and is dragged away. Joe covers his ears to shield himself from the unsettling sounds, and the AI's voice reassures him that everything occurring is intended to restore his peace of mind. With the arrival of the sunrise, a familiar whistle pierces the air, and a male voice congratulates Joe on the beautiful day. However, the tone quickly shifts as the voice reminds him to keep the cameras clean, warning of punishment if he fails to do so. Joe's neighbor chimes in, characterizing the previous night's unsettling incident as a motivational speech that he'll eventually become accustomed to. Following instructions, Joe gathers some meager trash and disposes of it in a noxious hole in the floor, covered by a small hatch. As he does so, he makes a disturbing discovery beneath his feet, a strand of hair leading to a human skull. Horrified, Joe screams, but his neighbor, seemingly desensitized to such sights, informs him that many people have met their end here, and Joe will have to acclimate. Reminding him of the contract he signed upon joining Mallard, the neighbor explains that Mallard gives this to everyone, but few bother to read the fine print to the end. In this grim reality, everything comes with a price. As Joe begins to acclimate to the routine, the AI voice interjects, prompting Joe to interrupt it with a shout. He asserts that he worked for the corporation for a decade and demands immediate release. In response, Mallard Corporation announces the commencement of a qualification enhancement seminar for Joe. Allegedly, his recent decline in productivity provides an opportunity for improvement. Mallard Corporation explains that Joe, once an exemplary employee, has a new job from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. His task is to turn the mill, aiming for 50 rotations daily. Falling short will result in punishment. Mallard emphasizes the motto, "Enough is not good enough," urging Joe to strive to maintain his position, salary, corporate apartment, and life. Mallard wishes him success, but Joe attempts to persuade the AI to release him, only to be advised by his neighbor not to waste his strength. Right now, Joe has to work hard to stay alive. It's tough at first, but he keeps pushing the mill until it starts moving. Mallard Corporation congratulates him on his first successful rotation and suggests a virtual celebration for his achievement. Joe continues working while listening to the corporation's ads. When the workday ends, Mallard praises Joe for completing his first day of self-improvement work, mentioning that he surpassed the quota, which is good news. However, at night, Joe hears the distressing screams of women as Mallard announces more dismissals. Later, Joe's neighbor, finding out that Joe doubled the quota, advises him not to keep up that pace. Joe is confused because if he doesn't meet the quota, he gets punished, but if he exceeds it and is last among everyone, it means trouble. The neighbor suggests Joe shouldn't tell everyone about his quota, emphasizing that they're not friends, and in this competitive environment, the neighbor will always try to do better. Despite climbing the corporate ladder and receiving bonuses, they all share a commonality: they seem to have reached the top, but it's not as great as it seems. Suddenly, Joe opens up about his wife and the son they've been eagerly waiting for, who is now here. The neighbor advises him to work his best. It's the only way to survive in this place, but overdoing it is not an option. The new workday begins, and as Joe pushes the mill, memories of inspecting their new home with his wife flood his mind. He had promised to work even harder to provide for it. The day ends with a knock on Joe's door, and he's ordered to strip naked. Though scared, he complies, finding himself under a stream of water. After a quick wash, he returns to his chamber. The next day arrives, and the outside weather is significantly hotter, causing Joe to quickly become exhausted. He turns to his neighbor, questioning the purpose of the mill and their existence here. The neighbor responds that they produce nothing. The place is empty of purpose or meaning. Soon, Joe runs out of water and calls out to the guard for help. However, the guard advises him to collect his urine and drink it, filtered through his sneakers. Joe is reluctant, but the invisible interlocutor mocks him, claiming that Mallard knows what he needs. Here, he will be pushed to his limits, and Mallard wants to see how far he can go before breaking. Joe persists in his work, reflecting on how his wife once doubted his ability to pay the bills. He had promised her a better life for their child. That evening, Mallard notes Joe's growing self-awareness. In a moment of realization, he sees the name Alex carved out. Curious, he questions the neighbor about Alex, who is described as a legend that managed to escape from their predicament. The following morning, Mallard thanks Joe for his diligence and rewards him with a personalized pen. Then, she presents a daunting new daily quota of 370 laps. Joe, horrified and frustrated, expresses his discontent. The AI explains that people often underestimate their strengths, and although it's tough, this is how the world changes. As Joe starts pushing the mill, he notices a change in the counter. Instead of marking laps, a cross appears, indicating punishment. 1 cross equals 2 laps, and the count continues geometrically. Despite the challenge, Joe refuses to give up. However, when the neighbor learns of the overwhelming number of laps assigned to him, he becomes furious. Joe, having exceeded the unattainable number, argued with Mallard, and now all of them will suffer the consequences. Mallard announces Joe's failure to meet the quota and expresses disappointment, emphasizing that taking care of colleagues is the company's main principle. To replace him, a new colleague, Kate Stevens, is introduced. Joe is horrified when he sees his wife's face on the screen, and he promises to exceed any plan just to prevent her from being brought here. Mallard gives him 1 day and activates a massive glowing screen above his compartment, denying him rest. The next workday begins, and Joe pushes the mill under Mallard's wishes for a productive day. Suddenly, he sees a second Joe in front of him, mocking his hopes and suggesting he should give up after failing. Despite this, Joe stubbornly continues pushing the mill. Exactly at the required moment, he completes the daunting 370 laps. Mallard congratulates him and cancels the penalty. As motivation, they show him images of his wife holding a baby. Overwhelmed, Joe cries tears of joy but is immediately struck with sorrow as he realizes he missed his son's birth. In the morning, Joe turns to his neighbor, seeking information about the place. The neighbor reminisces about his son, whom he only saw in childhood due to constant work. Advising Joe to investigate the blind spot, Joe rushes to the wall. After careful examination, he discovers a hidden area and, using the gifted pen, punctures the wall, gradually expanding the recess overnight. This routine continues for many days and nights. Joe works on the wall each night after pushing the mill during the day. Eventually, he manages to create a hole big enough to crawl through. Excited, Joe crawls through but finds himself in complete darkness. Suddenly, a person appears, hits him on the head, and wishes him sweet dreams. Regaining consciousness in his chamber, Joe discovers the hole sealed, and the AI voice of Mallard Corporation resumes. Mallard expresses disappointment but decides to give him one last chance. Mallard believes Joe is too fixated on his desires and fails to see the big picture. As a consequence, his neighbor was punished, and Joe's daily quota has been increased to an unattainable 1,000 laps. Rushing to the wall, Joe discovers that his neighbor's leg is broken, and he won't be able to complete even a single lap. In a startling confession, the man reveals that they are being controlled by a computer he created himself. The first algorithm he wrote self-improved, creating the second, and so on. Now, people don't understand how it works. Joe has an epiphany: if they stop working, everyone's score will drop to 0, and he wonders what the algorithm will do then. Shouting to the others about his discovery, Joe proposes they stop working. People respond, expressing support for his idea, but as the workday begins, everyone fears the consequences of not working, and they start pushing their mills. Despite Joe's attempts to persuade his neighbors, they are reluctant to defy the system. Frustrated and realizing the futility of his efforts, Joe cries and picks up the pen. In the evening, he talks with his neighbor, who reveals his name as Alex. Alex had also managed to escape from his chamber but was brought back, just like Joe. At night, Joe hears that Mallard has taken away Alex. In the morning, the AI wakes Joe up and attempts to boost his spirits by showing him images of his wife and their walking baby. However, Joe is horrified, realizing he can't endure being in this place for much longer. He shouts insults at Mallard, and immediately, he's fired. The doors open, and a crowd of clerks enters, silently watching Joe as he thrashes among them, desperate for an answer. Then, a man in uniform enters and confesses that he enjoys firings, mentioning that 12 clerks witnessed Joe's dismissal. The man loads a syringe and laments Joe's ingratitude, claiming that Mallard gave him the whole world. He expresses hopes of soon having a house available on one of the streets where a single mother with a young son lives. Losing control, Joe starts beating the man. Mallard announces the security guard's failed mission and his impending firing, while Joe, on the contrary, will be promoted. The man, now bloodied, asks Joe to continue, and then Joe stands up and declares that he is not a monster and he leaves. Immediately, Joe finds himself in an office where some people are working. Someone congratulates him on passing a career simulator, and this all happened in just an hour. Even though his son hasn't been born yet, Joe faced challenges with middle-level managers but got stuck on the 8th level. Mallard, the controlling force, recognized Joe's exceptional abilities. His productivity increased, personal qualities improved, and the coup he organized exceeded expectations. Now considered a creative leader, Joe removes the suction cups from himself, but the person he's talking to doesn't seem to notice. Instead, he's invited to explore his new office within Mallard. The promise is that there are many positions available, and climbing to the top can take years. Soon, the duo arrives at the desired floor, and Joe can't shake off thoughts about the time spent in the simulation. The office is adorned with new gadgets, and he anticipates a salary increase and other perks. A contract is placed on the table, warning against disclosing simulation experiences, with termination as the consequence. Despite reservations, Joe signs it, receiving assurances that Mallard is now his company forever. Seated at the table, Joe looks at a photo of his wife and decides to call Kate. She's surprised, and Joe can barely hold back tears as he recounts his long, eventful day. After catching his breath, he promises to dismantle this oppressive place. The movie is presented as science fiction, but behind every word and action of the hero, the harsh reality of the modern corporate system is laid bare: blatant exploitation, causing people to live for work rather than work to live. Thanks for watching, guys.